Thank you for tuning into Inflection's Crowdsource Recap. This session was all about mastering communication for a thriving school community. Keep watching for key insights presented by Kyle Lair, a co-pilot with Inflection's coaching program, Carol Fenstermacher, owner of Fenstermacher PR, and Michelle Liebhart, a facilitator at Inflection.
We're going to dive into this to beginning with from the perspective of Inflection and the work that we do through the navigation tool. And so when we talk about effective communication structures, we kind of look at 4 different points. One, communication is bidirectional, encompassing both formal and informal structures. And I think oftentimes when we work with school districts, and even during my time in working within school districts, we oftentimes think of communication as what we put out to parents, okay, or what we directly put out to students. And in this case, what we need to really make sure that we're understanding is communication is both the formal things, but it's also the informal communication that we have with our students, with our parents, with our greater community as well too. And then it's bidirectional. Okay, this isn't just what the district puts out or what the school puts out. This is that conversation and the communication that goes back and forth and encompasses all those things. We also, communication structures need to prioritize the needs and reach those that are the furthest from opportunity. And I know this is a discussion that happens a lot in districts when we're talking about their communication and their comms, is how are we reaching those that we normally don't reach? How are we reaching those that are furthest from opportunity? We know that some of our more traditional means of communication will get there and they will land with those that maybe aren't the furthest from opportunity, but we've got to find ways to reach everybody and make sure that we're connecting with everybody. Another piece, intentional listening emphasizes what is good and positive. And I loved that Kyle mentioned in his warm-up too, that listening is one of his favorites. I think all of us as school leaders, we've got to get really comfortable with, and we've got to enjoy listening. And that gets into that bi-directional communication. Like we need to be listening to those that we're serving. We need to be listening deeply. And then communication structures strengthen the school's identity and reinforce the shared vision of readiness. So at Inflection, we talk about kind of the 2 anchors. One being that school's identity. What are those values? What is that school's purpose? What is it that we all share? And then we talk about a shared vision of readiness for our students. Carol and I, when we talk about this with districts, oftentimes we're talking about what are those key messages? And oftentimes we also align those with the values. And so that's a big key piece of this as well, too, is having a discussion with a superintendent a few hours ago related to their social media. And their social media is doing a lot of great things. They're pushing out a lot of things, but it's connected to nothing. So it just sounds like a lot of stuff that's coming out, and it's not aligned to some key messages. And when they do that alignment, that brings those values out and kind of starts to create a story or a culture within that school district through those communications as well too. So we'll be talking a lot about those pieces today.
Thanks, Kyle. So my name's Carol, and as Kyle said, I do some work with him. I worked in 2 different school districts, one in Washington and one in Oregon as their chief communications officer. And I also do a lot of work with the National School PR Association, doing communication audits for school districts across the country. So go in and evaluate all their communications, what's working, what's not. So that's where I'm coming from today. So we're going to dive in and talk about what it's going to take to build a strategic communications plan. And as Kyle mentioned, we need to have key messages. And they don't have to be big, long words. They don't have to, be 20 sentences long. It can just be something short. In fact, I recommend the shorter the better, because you should be able to just spout them off 1, 2, 3. So academic goals, quality education. How can anybody argue that we're not doing good work and not giving out a quality education to all our kids? So how do you fit different things within that bucket of quality education? Another, safe and secure schools. Every parent wants their kids to be safe. We want our students and our staff to be safe. So that's part of our values and beliefs. How many times have we started out letters about something that's happened and the number 1 priority is the safety of our students and staff? So that's a great key message. And the other one is the responsible use of taxpayers' dollars. And that's something that sometimes we forget, that we need to explain to our community what we're doing with the money and how we're being good stewards of that money. that they are giving us in taxes, and what's the return on investment for them. As you're developing your key messages, because you're here, I'm assuming that you've also done some research about your own district. You kind of know where the community is coming from. So I also talk a lot when I work with districts about, and we call it RPI, and it stands for Research, Planning, Implementation, and Evaluation. So you've done your research already. You're here, you're listening, you've got your maxims in your district, and now you have your key messages. Now the next part of that is going to be how you're going to build a plan for it. And, if you don't have research, or for example, when Kyle and I are working with districts that are going for bonds, we always encourage, force sometimes, them to do some research. What does the community feel? Bond amounts, what's a good amount? Will they support? Are we going to go too high and automatically have them say no? So there's different types of research. There's also some secondary research out there. Pew research. I mean, it's so much about education. And you look at the various association magazines and publications they put out, whether it's AASA or ASBA, they're always putting things out, and that's another form of research. What's working, what's not.
Just kind of transitioning us before I go into this piece on key messages, Carol mentioned that, we almost to a certain extent kind of force that research on districts when they are going after a school bond. School bonds involve all your community members coming together, going out and voting for or against a pretty significant investment in your schools. And one of the things that we do through that entire process is there's different types of research, different types of information that we use. So in some cases, we're using scientific polling, where we have a really good idea of how that community feels through phone surveys. We use some school district surveys. We use some things that are a little bit more concrete, like we know those things. But then what we also do is a little bit of that digging down beneath the surface and finding out how people really feel. So we meet regularly with those leaders to find out, what are you hearing from your students? What are you hearing from your staff? What are you hearing from your community members? What are you seeing on social media? What are some of those comments that we're seeing? And that kind of gets a little bit into that bi-directional that we talked about earlier too, that I just want to reinforce is a really important part of this conversation as well too, is it's not just sending out a survey. It's not just getting kind of some of those more traditional pieces that you would use as part of your research. It's also about digging a little bit deeper under the surface, and that has to be bi-directional. That has to be that communication that's coming both ways, and really paying attention to what people are saying. I attend a lot of the community forums and activities that their committees do when we're doing bond work, just so I can listen to their constituents talk. And where does that line up with the research that we've already done through polling? And how does it help me deepen my understanding of what they need to hear from the district on our end? Now, kind of transitioning through that research part, how you develop your key messages for the year. If you're an Inflexion school, you have your maxims, and I think this is a great place to start. If you're not, oftentimes districts will have values, or they'll have cultural things that they're trying to develop within their system. And these are great things to tie your messaging to, and both externally to your greater community, but also internally to your staff as well too. And we're going to use Marcola as an example, because this is a group that I've worked with through my role with Inflexion, but it's also a group that my firm works with, and Carol and I work with on their district communications as well too. There are three values, and they're really simple maxims. We care, we create, we grow. What I will tell you is special about their maxims is not those 6 words. It's that it comes to life in every single thing that they do. So their internal communications, their professional development, how they talk about things, they always tie it to we care, we create, we grow. And in their district, they've taken it a step further as they've built that culture internally. They're also trying to build that culture within their community. And so on the next slide, you'll see some of the work that we've done with them. And I'm really proud of what they've done, in that they've made a commitment to communicating to their greater community the things that are important to their greater community, and doing it through those values that they created, so that when people in their community who are not connected to the school, they understand through storytelling the values that this school has, and their values that really truly do line up with this community. And so you kind of see on the newspaper that we do for them quarterly, it's their first 3 articles are under the titles of we care, we create, we grow. And we specifically find stories that we know are going to resonate with that community of things that are happening within those schools that fall within the culture that they're trying to create as well too. So this is just kind of another way that we tie those key messages, values in to the greater community. And then they do a great job within their building of tying those values into the things that they do every day.
I would point out, look at how short those are. We care, we create, we grow, and they're things everybody can remember. And again, if you think of it as buckets, you can fit so much under each one of those, even a big blue tractor.
And I think too, the thing with this, and I had this was the conversation I was referencing earlier that I had with the superintendent around their social media, is everything that they post could fall under their key messages, but they are not attaching the key messages to their posts. So all it is a splattering of stories. When you start to align it with your values, you are not just telling that story, you are strengthening that value and people's understanding and recognition that these are the key things that your district is about. And I think that's a key piece that oftentimes people miss, is like, continue to tell people what it is you're all about, not just through the stories, but also through connecting those to your values or your key messages.
So now we've had the opportunity to explore key messages. This is the fun part. Now it's time to start thinking about how we communicate these messages to all the people within our school communities.
Well, I think Carol, I might add to that, going back to the newspaper that we shared from Marcola. So once this newspaper first came out, the staff immediately went to the superintendent and the leadership with a host of stories that they wanted to add. And they actually had to step back, meet with their staff, and kind of explain, like, this is a conversation around audience. What is it we're trying to accomplish it here? Who is it that we're trying to communicate with? And make sure that they understood that, like, some of these things that you're bringing towards us, that fits over here, because this audience, that's who this is important to, right? And so making sure that you really do truly know who it is that you're speaking to, what it is that you're trying to communicate. And then I also, oftentimes what we're trying to do with that newspaper, which is the broader community, is we're trying to get across to people the good things that we know all of us agree about with schools. It's a bridge builder. It's not a place to create more division. It's a place to remind everybody of how good public schools are and the good work that people are doing. And if we're going to put something in there that's going to create division, it's probably not a newspaper article. It's probably some level of public meeting that we're going to have to engage with people, because we've got some disagreement on things. So thinking about who the audience is and thinking about what it is that we're really trying to communicate to them, and most importantly, what it is that they want to hear from us, is what we want to do with those.
Right. And then we also do need to factor in how we're going to communicate. So which tools and tactics. And too often what we do is we are like, okay, well, we're going to do a website, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. And we just expect everybody to show up. So we're just kind of glossing over this real quickly, but it does go really, really deep. And I recently saw an article from the Notre Dame of Maryland University, which explained how the different generations want to get their information. So when you're doing your research, you may want to research that also.
And you are trying to communicate them the things that they want to hear. That requires bidirectional communication. That means you have to have ways to be able to get feedback. You have to have ways that you're able to engage with those different groups, because otherwise you are going to miss the mark with what it is that is important to them. And so I just think we want to make sure we really emphasize that today, that this communication is not just what we put out. It is also what we get back and receive, and what we do with that.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at Riverview School District in Washington State. And I actually did an audit for them. So I was so excited when I heard about this. They have a brand new superintendent and she wanted to connect with the community. And it's not a large community, but she was really trying to figure out how to get that two-way conversation going. So what she ended up doing was, initially on Thursday and Friday afternoon, she set aside a couple hours each day, and she broke them up into 15-minute segments. And they let everybody in the community, whether it's students, families, community members, that Anybody could come in for 15 minutes. They had to make an appointment, but they could come in and talk to her about anything they wanted to. And, if they had an idea, if they were concerned about something, the only restriction she put on it was it can't be a personnel issue. And initially, a few people came in and then more people. And then she finally was like, oh, and you can't block like 4 15-minute segments in a row. But she allowed everybody to come in and it worked really, really well. And now she's in her second year there. And I looked recently on their webpage and she's doing it 1 day a week. But again, just keeping that open and, having people come in the office and making herself available. And I think it's, it really helped her, one, to get to know the community and the community to get to know her. But it's that two-way dialogue and being open.
All right. So another of the elements of effective communication and the inflection approach is, the communication structures prioritize meeting the needs of and reaching those furthest from opportunity. And I'm going to expand this a little bit too, and just not those furthest from opportunity, but also when we oftentimes think of the different groups that we're communicating to, like one of the ones that was on Carol's slide there was, it's your parent group. Well, that parent group, as Carol said, they had pages. That parent group can be broken into several different groups, right? Who are coming from different circumstance, different backgrounds, different experiences. And we need to be considering that when we think about what structures and what types of communication are we using to ensure that we're not just communicating to one group, right? To ensure that we are communicating to those furthest from us, and those that in some cases need us more than others, right? And so how do we do that? And how do we do those things differently? And I'm going to use an example that Carol and I had recently in a district. Carol and we do communication strategies and pre-bond work for this school district. And the school district is in a agricultural community. There are a lot of students in families who are not citizens, but live within that community and support that community and have been longstanding with that community. Right after the inauguration, they had an annual event that they normally did, and they were struggling with how are we going to communicate with these families in a way that continues to build the relationship that we have, enables us to engage in this activity that we've done annually with them, knowing that the traditional communication could bring with it some negative impact, could draw some attention to it that either keeps people from coming or causes other people to come to something that has traditionally been something that this district does with that particular community. And the reason I bring this one up is that they were thinking through this. So the first thing is they knew their community. They knew what they were trying to accomplish. They knew what that community needed. They didn't know exactly how to do things differently in this case. And they brought up an idea to Carol and I that I think both Carol and I could see each other on the screen going, like, this is a really bad idea. Like, you're actually going, and we brought it up with them. We talked to them through that idea is actually going to bring forward the thing that you are concerned with bringing forward. So let's talk through this. And we were able to talk through it in a way and figure out how they were going to communicate with that community that they had such strong relationships with, through those strong relationships, to strengthen and continue to accomplish what they had done throughout previous years in kind of a new circumstance, with things that had changed within that time period. And so I think it's just, once again, it's important the lesson in that is not to just identify your groups, know your groups, create effective communication plans and structures to meet their needs, but to also be reflective as things change and to understand that sometimes how we're communicating one year, circumstance might change in the next year, and you need to change that. And not to be a broken record, but a lot of that comes through, once again, that communication that's bi-directional, right? And one of the things that Carol and I encouraged in that meeting, even when we had kind of come up with a game plan, is talk to those that you know within that community before you move in that direction, and make sure that that is going to work for that community, and that's going to be something that's going to help strengthen that relationship that you currently have with them. And so, once again, it's got to be bi-directional. You have to listen to your people. You have to know your people.
Kyle, I want to bring something up that I just saw yesterday. A school district that is actually comprised of a large group of kids whose parents are in the military. And the things the school district has been trying to do outreach, because what they were seeing was some issues with kids and what they couldn't understand what was going on. And it was all around a big deployment that was coming up. And so, being aware of that and how could they have extra supports for kids, and talking to the parent who wasn't being deployed, like, how can we help you help your child? And it took a whole district effort, but they did a great job, and it's now actually being looked at as a model for other school districts around the country. But again, it's that two-way conversation. It's not just, oh my gosh, these kids aren't doing as well as they should be. It was why, and reaching out and finding out and knowing and being aware of what was happening within that community at that time.
Thanks for watching. For more resources on effective communication strategies, visit portico.inflexion.org, and be sure to keep an eye out for our next Crowdsource.